Welcome to The Explainer. Today we've got a story for you that, honestly, sounds like it's straight out of a movie. It's a modern legend from South Africa about one man, a prison that was supposedly inescapable, and a very creative escape plan.
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? You build a place that's supposed to be the end of the line. A fortress. It's got a perfect, unbroken record. So how in the world does one person manage to break the unbreakable?
And yeah, that's the legend. That's the story that just completely took over the headlines and captured everyone's imagination. A tale of almost superhuman skill and some serious guts. But, as we're about to find out, the truth is usually way more complicated. And, frankly, a lot more disturbing.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the myth that made Annanias Mathe a household name. Then we'll peel that back and look at the brutal truth of his crimes. We'll unpack what really happened during his escape, examine the huge institutional breakdown it exposed, and finally, see how this epic story came to a surprisingly quiet end.
Okay, first things first, we have to talk about the legend itself, because the myth of Houdini is just as important to this story as the man, mainly because it did such a good job of hiding what was really going on.
So let's just set the scene here. C-Max in Pretoria. This wasn't just any prison. We're talking about the absolute peak of security in the country, the place they sent the most dangerous criminals. And for 36 years, its record was perfect, spotless. It was, for all intents and purposes, escape-proof. And that perfect record is exactly what made the events of November 18, 2006 so completely unbelievable.
So here's the tale that everyone heard, the one that basically went viral. He somehow slips his cuffs, covers his entire body in petroleum jelly, and then, get this, squeezes his way through a window that's only 20 by 60 centimeters. I mean, think about that. It just sounds impossible, right? And that one single incredible act, that's what earned him the nickname Houdini.
And as if that wasn't enough, to really stick it to them, the story goes that he left a little message for the guards on his way out. It just perfectly cemented this image of him as not just a master escapee, but as this larger-than-life character who was openly mocking the entire system.
But you know, as wild as that Houdini story is, we need to talk about why his escape triggered one of the biggest manhunts in the country's history. It's because Annanias Mathe wasn't some charming trickster. He was one of South Africa's most feared predators.
Yeah, behind that flashy nickname was a really dark reality. Mathe was a Mozambican national, the leader of a huge and violent gang. His rap sheet was just staggering. Murder, rape, hijacking, dozens of armed robberies. His brutality was infamous, with rape being described as one of his trademarks. The media didn't just call him Houdini, they also called him the Devil's Child. This was the man who was suddenly back on the streets.
And here's the first big crack in that whole Houdini myth. This wasn't his first rodeo. Just a year earlier, he'd already escaped police custody. But he didn't do it by squeezing through a tiny window. He did it by paying a R$15,000 bribe. This set a clear pattern, not of physical genius, but of exploiting corruption.
Which leads us right to the absolute heart of this whole thing. Was Annanias Mathe really a criminal mastermind who outsmarted a perfect system? Or was there something else going on? Something a lot more rotten, deep inside the system itself?
And this number right here, this is the real key. While all the papers were obsessed with the petroleum jelly, the real story, the one that was way more plausible, was about R$80,000 allegedly paid to prison officials. The whole Houdini spectacle, it turns out, was a pretty convenient distraction from a simple, dirty bribe.
So let's just put it side by side. On one hand, you've got the myth, a story about a lone genius with superhuman abilities who outsmarted everybody. But on the other hand, the reality that investigators found, it was a totally different story. One about staff corruption, gross negligence, and a whole list of procedural failures. This wasn't about one man's skill. It was about a deeply compromised system. And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. Experts looked at the facts and basically said, no way. As Johan Berger from the Institute for Security Studies put it, not even the real Houdini could have pulled this off. The only way out of that prison was with help from the inside. The only key that could open that door was corruption.
So, you can imagine what happened next. This wasn't just about one guy escaping anymore. This massive security failure put the entire correctional services system on trial in the court of public opinion. It became a national crisis.
And what the official investigation found was, to put it mildly, absolutely damning.
The task force's final report wasn't about petroleum jelly, it was about deliberate aiding by staff, or officials being so unbelievably negligent that they might as well have just held the door open for him.
And when they really dug in, they realized it wasn't just one little thing that went wrong. It was a complete and total system breakdown, a perfect storm of failure. You had the alleged bribe, staff failing lie detector tests, basic shift change rules being totally ignored, which meant no one even knew he was gone for hours. Then you had people faking entries in security logs to cover their tracks. A key to a critical watchtower was just missing. And to top it all off, there were no electronic sensors or alarms to act as a failsafe. It was a cascade of failures, one after another.
So he escapes in November, and the country is on high alert for 2 full weeks. And how do they finally catch him? Not through some brilliant detective work, but because the car he hijacked happened to have a GPS tracker in it. Isn't that something? In a story defined by human failure, it was the one piece of tech they couldn't bribe that got him. The investigation soon confirmed all the corruption, and by 2009, he was back behind bars with a 54-year sentence.
And this time, there were real consequences. This wasn't something they could just sweep under the rug. 6 prison wardens were fired. And in a pretty shocking move, several officials actually faced criminal charges, not just for corruption, but for gross negligence. The system was finally forced to take a hard look at itself.
So after all that, the legendary escape, the massive manhunt, the national scandal, you'd expect a pretty dramatic ending to the story of South Africa's Houdini, right? Well, it didn't quite end with a bang.
It really doesn't get more ironic than this. The legend, South Africa's Houdini, the master escape artist, the devil's child. The reality of his death, he died in a hospital bed from complications of severe constipation. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. His epic, mythical life story met a completely mundane and frankly pathetic end.
But you know what really shows his lasting legacy? Even when he was on his deathbed, genuinely sick and dying, the prison officials didn't believe him. They thought it was all just another trick, another elaborate escape plot. That's how deep the distrust ran. He had broken the system so badly that they couldn't even recognize the truth when it was right in front of their eyes.
And that's really the question we're left with, isn't it? The story of a guy covered in petroleum jelly is, let's be honest, a lot more exciting than a story about corrupt guards and sloppy paperwork. But when we get caught up in the flashy legend of the criminal, do we risk missing the real lesson, the much more important one about the broken systems that allow dangerous people to thrive in the first place?
That's all for this explainer. Thanks so much for watching.